I'm Phil Rude. I'm an illustrator, comic book artist, and sometimes writer. It's been a while since my last update, and that's because I've been busy, as I'm going to talk about right now. A few weeks back, I was contacted by this dude named Chris. He runs a local comic book publisher down here, local to me. It's called Bent Box Comics. Check them out. They publish a handful of titles, some really cool and unique and interesting stuff. I think it's really worth taking a look at. Anyway, Chris told me about a small Comic Con called Reflecticon that was happening in a town a little bit north of us. And he asked if I'd like to set up there. As he was offering to share a table with me. Or rather, to give me some space on. He had a big setup. They're a much bigger outfit than me. So it gave me some real estate on his table. Keep in mind, I don't publish any books with Bent Box. I've not worked with them before. I've only known Chris through, social media, where he has reached out to me and we've gone back and forth a little bit. He's just sort of aware of me. But this was just him reaching out to a local guy and offering some opportunity, which I think is really cool. It's a lot of what like independent creatives are all about. It's a great part of the community is everybody sort of helps each other out. There's I think there's perceived competition sometimes. Which may be there, but it's all in the spirit of like lifting. Everybody's lifting each other up, So I did take him up on it, and this was my first event in many years, and my first Comic-Con ever, which is really weird to say when people asked me a lot that day. How long have you been doing this? And I said, quite a while. 10 years of various kind of illustration stuff, but I've never tabled before. And, I'm very aware that pushing 50 years old is pretty old to be doing your first con, but it was a really cool experience for me. But since it had been so long, I've done school events, I've done library events, I've done stuff like that before. But I had to pull some stuff together. It's been a long time since I did any kind of event, any kind of tabling, or in-person sales kind of thing for my art. So, in just a few weeks, I had to pull a lot of stuff together. I don't currently have anything that I'm publishing. I have some projects that I'm working on. Nothing that's really ready to put out there to heavily promote at a show, to sell anything from. But I do have a book from a couple years ago called Nictitate, which I illustrated after my buddy Corey Scott had written it. And that actually came together in a really cool little book. I'm very proud of it. And Corey was good enough to help me out. And he got some copies printed and sort of fast-tracked them down to me. Really awesome, big help to me. Thank you so much, Corey. So that gave me something to put on my table. I ordered a few copies of my art book for children. It's The Monster Alphabet, something I threw together. It was sort of my first self-publishing thing by myself that I had written, done, put together, and put out in the world all by myself. That is sort of it's older, but I still like to have it on my table. It's kind of a unique thing I did a long time ago. So I was able to get a few copies of that. I set out to do as many small sketches as I could, just something that I would have that didn't take me a huge amount of time. Some of them are kind of fast and loose, but they were cheap. I could have them on my table. It's art. It's something a kid could buy. So I have a bunch of those. And finally, I placed an order for a comic that I published, I think over 10 years ago now. It's called Tales of the Warrior Eigor. And it's something I hadn't really thought about or kept in stock in a while. just kind of this relic uh, of my past self kind of thing. It was the first self-published. It was the first comic book that I self-published that I had put together, um, and it is something that I had kind of moved on from and hadn't thought about much. But it was also something I could get some copies of pretty quickly. So I put an order in for those. They came in. They looked good, as they always do when I have them printed. That's a shout out to Kablam. Kablam is a great printer in the Orlando area. They do print on demand. They've done it for years. They were the first sort of print on demand service for comics that I was even aware of. And they're still there. Their website looks very similar to what it did when it first started. And they're still doing really good quality print on demand work. So shout out to Kablam for that. Anyway, I was getting things ready for the con. I had my copies of all my books. I was putting them together. And I wanted to do something with the Eigor books that I've done before, which is like, you bag and board them. And I wanted to sketch on the backing boards. I wanted to sketch the characters. But I found a little hiccup in that plan because it had been so long since I had drawn these characters. It had been so long since I had drawn Eigor that I literally had to take a copy of the comic out and open it up and reference it. And sort of had to relearn how to draw them. There's a story from a few years ago that the Rolling Stones, after one of their farewell tours, went back out on tour. And it had been a long time since they had played like their full catalog. And they had to essentially rent an auditorium where they could just sit in there and relearn all their old Rolling Stone songs. That's what I felt like. I am like the Keith Richards of independent comics. Not really. Anyway, I made some sketches of Eigor and his one-eyed owl Gunther. And as I did that, it sort of came back to me pretty quick. All the joking about having to relearn it and what a chore it was. I didn't have to rent an auditorium where I could seclude myself and do this. It came back. It was kind of surprising how it came back. I guess drawing some characters are like riding a bike, or like a character riding a bike, or drawing a bike, or drawing a character riding a bike and drawing their old character. It's some sort of cross messaging of cliches. Either way, pick your own, go with it. By the end of doing a dozen or so sketches, I had the gist of the character down again. Which was fun. It was fun to kind of revisit that character and draw it again. And through doing that, and through talking about the book at Reflecticon, I had a stack of them on there. I showed Chris the book. I got some feedback on it that it was really cool. It's kind of a weird book. It's not my best art, I think. But I got some general like, oh, this looks interesting, which I always take as a compliment. If I can do something interesting, I feel like I'm doing my job. But in sort of revisiting and thinking about the character again over a couple days, I remembered that I had also been in the process of sort of making some changes. Let me just say, the initial concept for the character was, what if Conan the Barbarian was a out of shape, drunken idiot? That's it. It's just sort of like, just sort of a simple concept of like, what if this guy was really inept instead of being a muscular Superman? This guy's kind of a screw up. So that was my initial idea. And after I'd come up with it, my idea for the character was to do sort of a series of short pulp novels, sort of like the beginnings of Conan and Cole the Conqueror and those sort of 20s and 30s pulps. I love those stories. I love the Conan the Barbarian stories, all the Robert E. Howard stuff. They're really, really fun. And that's what I wanted to do, just with leaning on the comedy a little bit more. And so I did exactly one of those before shifting into comics. It's called Rock in a Hard Place. It's kind of fun. I don't love it, but it was the first story I made with Eigor. I found it to be a lot of work through the copy editing, and also the fact that I found myself wanting to draw more. I just wanted spot illustrations in there. And the more of them I drew, the more I'm like, well, I want to illustrate this and this and this. And then it just made sense to just, instead of spot illustrations, let's just illustrate the whole story. Let's just make a comic. So I made a comic, and then I made another one. I made 2 issues. I had mapped out a couple more. I had put together this book, this flip book that I thought was really cool. I had, an issue on each side where it flips over. I'm still really proud of that sort of book design that I did. And in the process of making the next issue and sort of mapping out the stories for it, I was also doing some character redesigns. Just some little changes to it. Then it just sort of ended. It just sort of drifted away. There were some life happens issues at the time. Some other projects came up. I got interested in some other art pursuits. And I started teaching more. All this stuff happened. And I just sort of drifted away from Eigor in general. I just sort of moved on from it, which is fine. Totally cool. But now that I've drawn him in the past week a few times, I've thought about those redesigns that I was doing back when I was planning on issue 3. If you want to know about issue 3, I honestly could not tell you. I don't even know what the stories were. I have them probably in a notebook somewhere around here in a box as I'm sitting in the middle of a storage room in my house. I'm sure it's in here somewhere. I'm sure it's probably not even that good. But I was in the middle of some redesigns. And as I was thinking about those, I wanted to put them into practice here. I wanted to get familiar with the character again while exploring these changes. So this drawing that I'm doing here, I put those in place. I shifted his facial hair. He doesn't have an extreme, weird handlebar mustache anymore. And I did another kind of just sort of mustache into mutton chops, eccentric facial hair configuration. I took a lot of his hunched over head. He had this real extreme hunchback where his head was way down low. It's a fun look for a character. It gets a little restricting to draw them that way all the time. So I didn't do as much of that. I sort of gave him slightly better posture. I added a random piece of shoulder armor. And, it's just little things like that. And then a couple other small changes, the stitching on the front of his tunic, things like that. In putting this redesign together, it brought up some other changes that I thought I could make to the character as a whole. Maybe his origin, maybe the kind of setting he sits in. Maybe some things that could bring it out of the realm of being some Conan the Barbarian parody and maybe make Eigor his own thing. It just sort of sparked this idea that sparked other ideas that sparked more ideas and got me thinking about the kind of changes I could make to this property as a whole. I'm not ready to relaunch or reinvigorate this character. I'm not going to put a ton of energy into building some giant property where I'm like, this is the next big thing. I just like to think there's something interesting that could ultimately be done with this character if I decided to open that up. And I think this is something I may just keep on my drawing table to work on here or there. Experiment with some changes. Just sort of a personal project that maybe I'll do another story one day. Or maybe I'll just use it as an exercise in world building and character building. I'm not sure. Maybe I'll collect enough bladed weapons, collect enough weight in my belly, and enough bad posture that I may become Eigor myself. I don't know. That's just where I'm at with this character right now. I'm having a lot of fun with it, just as sort of a goofy little side project. This particular piece that I'm working on in this video, I had another reason for wanting to do that, and that is the beautiful red ink. This is Dr. P.H. Martin Bombay Crimson India ink for those of you who are playing along at home. If you are an art supply nerd and you wanted to know that, now you know it. And I'll let you know the rest of my supplies for this. I did this piece on Deleter comic paper. I use a Cotman watercolor round number 1 brush for the red ink. And I had a Princeton watercolor brush, size 1, also a round watercolor brush. And a Hunt's 102 Crow Quill, Old Faithful, as I call it. That is what I use for the black ink. And the black ink is Dr. P.H. Martin Black Star India ink with matte finish. Of course, it's like the GOAT ink. It's great. It all worked really well for this piece. Before I go on being another unpaid advertisement for Dr. P.H. Martin India ink, you know I love it. Please, give me a sponsorship. Martins, come on. Send me some free ink. Now we're caught up on the technical specs. The red ink, in particular, is what I was interested in. Derek and I have been working on Shepherd. That is our in-progress idea. And our idea for doing that is less of making a full-color book and more black and white. Again, I'm not much of a colorist. I can do it. It's not my forte, and it's not something I enjoy doing. And it's a lot faster to do a black and white book when I don't have the process of coloring in there as well. But we also wanted to do some spot color. Red being the most primary spot color that we've played with. Shepherd is a Western, but it's also a horror book. So we wanted to be able to show blood. It looks really sharp when it's black, white, and some sort of crimson red. We've been doing the color digitally, doing just black and white pages, and then in Photoshop, or rather Affinity Photo, I'll add the red where it needs to be added. But lately, I've been wondering if it might be possible for me to do it all on the page, on the physical page. I want to be able to do the red ink and have it be part of the native artwork. So it's all being done on the page. The less time I have to spend on a screen, I think the better. So it just got me wondering. It's not full color. It's not going to be that difficult to transfer if you're just adding one more color. But there still is some issue with that. Once you scan something in, it's going to be a little technical, and this is probably where some of you will zone out, but bear with me. Once you scan in some artwork and you're dealing with color, things get a little more complicated because the color doesn't always scan in true to what the color is on the page. So you have to make some adjustments. You also have to adjust the black and white of the page for the most absolute versions of themselves. And when they're the only two tones on that page, that's a lot easier to do. You can take the white in one direction, so it's absolute white, and you can take the black, so it is the blackest version, the richest black, with no gray variation in it. You can do an absolute, it's like a 50% threshold that puts you perfectly in the middle of those things. And that's great. It works great. But once you add one more color into that, it's less of a math problem and more of a fine tuning, because you have to keep you want the white to be very white, you want the black to be very black, and in adjusting that, you're going to adjust what your red looks like. So It can be a little tricky to keep it in balance and still make your red be the truest version of red. There's a balancing act to it. And admittedly, like I said before, I'm not the best at color. I'm not the best at technology. And I'm not the best at being smart in general. So I find it a little bit tricky, but I still want to figure it out. Long story short, this is the image that I want to practice that with. I've got spot blacks throughout this image. I've also got spot reds. And it's on the white paper. I'll scan this in. I'll see how balanced I can get everything. And I'll also reach out and say if any of you have any tips for this in general, please put them in the comments. Email them to me, philrootart@gmail.com. I will happily take any references or any sort of tips you can give me on this. I would find that very helpful. Thank you. Now to finish up the story that started this whole rant, tabling at Reflecticon. To sum it up, my sales were not what I had hoped for, but I did get rid of a couple books. I sold probably half the sketches that I took with me. And it was really a great day. I met a ton of cool people. My grandson and his parents, my son and daughter-in-law, they came to see me. It was really cool to have them there, sort of stopping in to say hi and meeting people that I was meeting. Rico, who owns Reflection Comics, Punta Gorda, Florida, put on the event. It was fantastic. Shout out to him. If you find yourself in Charlotte County, Florida, go find Reflection in Punta Gorda and buy some comics. Go support that shop. It's really cool. I want to shout out to Chris from Bentbox for making room for me at his table and bringing me along. Marvin from Swerve Comics, AR Farina, who's a super cool writer. He writes essays and novels. Mike J. Seeley, everyone who came out and said hi, anyone who talked comics and art with me for a while, whether you bought anything or not, just thanks everybody for coming out and making it a really great day. I had a blast at Reflecticon, and I'm looking forward to doing more cons next year. That's going to do it for me this time. Please subscribe to my channel so you never miss a video, and go to philrootart.com and see what I've got going on over there. Until we meet again, take care of yourselves.